and the department does not have a single successful interior Chinook hatchery, which is the final fallback position.
Tom Siddon, the Minister of Fisheries and Oceans at the time, stated that the agreement provided an acceptable level of certainty for the protection of the fish, even though his own scientists had told him otherwise.
In having reached what I think is a landmark settlement of a difficult problem, which will permit development to proceed in northwestern British Columbia, while at the same time ensuring that fish stocks are conserved, maintained, and enhanced in the future. And I thank you for that.
I think none of us object to political people making decisions. What we object to is political people making decisions and then manipulating a process in which it comes out appearing that that decision was made by managers and supported by scientific information, and that's a deception.
In 1990, the federal cabinet exempted the Kemano completion project from its own environmental assessment review process, a process which is law in Canada. A Senate Commons report said the cabinet's actions were illegal, unconstitutional, and subversive of constitutional democracy. In 1991, the Rivers Defense Coalition and the Carrier-Sakani Tribal Council appealed the decision in federal court, and they won. However, that decision was overturned the following year. A subsequent appeal to the Supreme Court of Canada by the Coalition and Tribal Council was denied. Scientists claim that it is not possible to take 88% of the water out of a river and still protect the salmon. Alcan says it can, and they've spent a lot of money trying to convince the public that Kemano completion is an environmentally safe project.
How many salmon is Alcan willing to sacrifice for the Kemano completion project? Not one salmon. Under a legal agreement with the federal and provincial governments, Alcan is obligated to protect the Chaco River salmon. Kemano completion, growth we can all live with.
They've been on the so-called worst polluter list put out by the BC Ministry of the Environment every time it's been released. It's only been out 8 times now, but our name is always there, front and center. There's certainly a long track record of their history of pollution and violation of standards in Quebec, where their smelters have been running for years. They've been fined $400 million was the fine levied by the courts in a case against the City of New York for illegally disposing of toxic waste in New York City landfill. They're part of a $43 million settlement in California as being one of several companies that was dumping toxic waste in unlined landfills. The community's water was contaminated. There were profound health impacts on the residents. The company's track record is just appalling everywhere they operate.
Alcan has also promised that their projects would bring great economic prosperity to northern British Columbia. Alcan's first project in the 1950s did create 2,100 permanent jobs in a town of 11,000 people, but that is about where it has ended. Plans to build 3 new smelters in the area have been put on hold. A pulp and paper plant to have been built in Vanderhoof by Alcan has been shelved. The Kemano completion project, already worth $600 million, will create only 8 to 12 permanent jobs. Towns along the Chaco are worried about the supply and quality of their water. Farmers will no longer be able to irrigate their crops. The recreational use of the river will be finished. Over 120 First Nations communities have thrived along the Fraser River for centuries. The project could reduce the sockeye salmon in the Fraser by 20%, which would affect hundreds of jobs throughout the province, native and non-native alike. But these costs have been left out of the equation.
Tell me, what do you think about the Kemano completion project?
Well, anything that endangers the fish I don't like, naturally. I'm a commercial fisherman.
So you see that really affecting your livelihood?
Well, if it lowers the river, it's going to probably screw up some habitat, and must do. So, I don't think too much of it, but can't eat power. You can eat fish, though.
The Stalo Nation means the people of the river. That's who we are. That's what we do. We fish, and we need those fish to remain Stalo. If we don't have if we don't have that, we're going to be lost. We'll be displaced people.
The plant where I work, 30% of our production comes from Fraser River stocks. So now if that fishing is curtailed to try and enhance those stocks after that environmental damage is done, it means that we will no longer be working in those plants. Our seasons will be very short, and economically, to Prince Rupert, it would be a disaster.
Are they going to destroy all the salmon on the Fraser River, one of our biggest rivers that produces fish? Are they going to destroy the whole thing just because they want to send electricity over to the States?
How much hydroelectricity from Alcan's Kemano completion project is being developed for export to the United States? Not 1 watt. Alcan is developing the power for future aluminum production in BC. Meanwhile, BC Hydro will use it to meet growing energy demands here at home.
Most opponents of the project will tell you that British Columbians won't need more power for another decade, and with the excess power from the first project, as well as conservation methods, there isn't a need for Kemano completion. If this is the case, we wanted to find out from BC Hydro what its plans were for the power, but they declined to speak with us. Catherine Stewart believes that there are many alternatives to projects like Kemano 2. They just aren't being given enough consideration.
Here in Canada, for instance, the federal government is now subsidizing the traditional energy sector to the tune of about $4 billion a year. Most of that money goes to nuclear energy, goes to coal, goes to gas, goes to oil. It does not go to solar. It does not go to wind farms. It doesn't go to small-scale hydro projects. It doesn't go to conservation and efficiency measures and building code standards that would reduce our energy consumption. It doesn't go to methods of conserving and utilizing energy that would create jobs for the long term.
Well, we pledged to have a public process to review the Kemano completion project during the 1991 election, and Premier Harcourt at that time said that this backroom deal had to be exposed to the light of day.
The British Columbia Utilities Commission hearings were set up by the New Democratic Party of British Columbia in 1994 to clear the air over the 1987 settlement agreement. The hearings were promoted as the first real public debate about the Kemano completion project. But there was to be no discussion about the effects of Kemano 1, nor the effects that Kemano completion will have on the Fraser River. Only the mitigative measures concerning the Nechako River could be debated. Not surprisingly, the Commission's report concluded that the long-term flows of the 1987 settlement agreement are not sufficient to protect the fisheries resource of the Nechako River. It's June, and the Cheslatta are having a camp out on Cheslatta Lake. People have come from across the country to hear their stories. There is laughter and there is drumming, but the pain from years of suffering lingers in the eyes of the elders. Soon Cheslatta Lake will be flooded again, like it has been twice a year for the last 43 years, disturbing once more the bones of their ancestors. So they rejoice while they can.
My father was telling me just a while ago, there was never a voice of a drum in this territory for over 50 years.
Every person on this earth is entitled to music and should be allowed to enjoy it without fear of being struck down. And I would like to present this drum to Chief Charlie's father on behalf of the Stala Tribal Council.
My grandfather, he told me, when you go away, don't go away for good, just come back here again.
So this is where you want to be, eh?
Yeah.
Beside your mom?
Yeah.
What the Cheslatta want most is to move home. They have set up a protection corridor around the Murray and Cheslatta lakes which would allow them to return to their homelands and follow their traditional lifestyle of hunting, trapping, and fishing. Alcan has said that if the Kemano completion project goes ahead, they will return their lands back to them for $1. But they neglected to tell the people that their plans also include the complete shutdown of the Skins Lake spillway. After 43 years, there are no more natural flows in the Cheslatta River. With no water coming from the reservoir, Cheslatta Lake would eventually dry up. If the Kemano completion project does not go ahead, the Cheslatta people still won't be able to move home unless a water release facility is set up at the Kenny Dam. This would allow water from the reservoir to bypass the Murray-Cheslatta system. It's what the Cheslattuten have been asking for since the first project, but so far, it isn't part of the plan. Mining companies are now in the area ready to take their piece of Cheslatta land, and logging companies are set to take every last tree. The Cheslattuten have been fighting the Kemano completion project for 15 years. Their legal costs have been staggering, but the toll that it has taken on the people is even worse. The graveyards in the Grassy Plains area are filled with Cheslatta people who have died from alcohol and drug abuse, suicides, shootings, and other violent deaths, afflictions unknown to them before their relocation. The Cheslattuten want to spend their time healing and reclaiming their culture. They want to teach their children how to live off the land and how to speak their language, but Alcan won't leave them alone.
What really left an impression on me was this young girl, maybe 16, 17, talking about her grandparents and the grief that they've gone through. And she started crying, which tells me that the healing has not taken place when it goes through 2 further generations, and they're feeling it as if it was yesterday.